So I left corporate with a bit of a vengeance. I quit without a plan. Why don't you ask him how he thinks it's going? I was like, because I don't care. And so this chief product officer was very frustrated with all of this and out loud said, well, F CX, F them. We can't build this business if CS and product are not talking.
Today's guest is someone who helps fast-growing companies scale their leadership without losing what makes them special. Gillian Davis is the founder of Overtime Leader, where she works with post-Series A scale-ups to build the culture, leadership, and clarity they need to grow well, not just fast. Before starting Overtime Leader, Gillian was the VP of People at WeTransfer, where she helped shape the company's leadership and culture during a time of rapid growth, and Director of Leadership and Culture at Us2, the studio behind Monument Valley and product design for major global brands, one of the most famous studios in London. She is also the co-author of First Time Leader, written with George Bradt, a practical guide that's become essential reading for new managers stepping into leadership for the first time. But what makes Gillian's perspective so compelling is how much of this she's lived herself, from stepping into a family business in crisis, to quitting corporate with a vengeance, to landing in a fast-moving startup with no systems and figuring it out the hard way. In this episode, you'll hear the moment she was ready to fire an intern and how one question changed everything, why she quit corporate without a plan and what she found instead, what it was like to join a startup where there were no systems, how she started applying product thinking to organizational change, and what founders often get wrong when they try to bring in senior leaders to help them scale. It all starts with the moment Gillian had to take over the family business and had to figure out how to lead fast. Let's get into it.
I was born into a family business, and they focused on, it was executive recruitment for very critical, highly skilled engineering talent, and actually recruited 3 of Canada's astronauts in the 90s. So I think proudly say that I think we're maybe Canadian's best executive recruitment company. But unfortunately, it was founded by my dad, who was diagnosed with Parkinson's in his mid-50s and had to step out of the business like the next day. So my mom, who had been doing ops, stepped in to run it and kind of called me in a panic around, what are we going to do about marketing? And I kind of put myself forward. That's what I'd studied. I was, doing some contracting at the time and said, well, why don't I give it a shot, see what happens? And then ended up co-running the business alongside my mom. And that's when I became like an IC to a manager. And I think, even now I have really big IC tendencies. It's how I work. And the roles I had played up until that point were quite designed for IC friendly formats. And so all that to say, it was a huge shift to go from doing it all yourself and going like, well, I did this, to shifting into what are we doing? And not only that, it also, the conditions were very interesting because I was leading a team of people who were a generation older than I was. And a lot of them had actually known me since I was in my teens. And, a few of them were quite vocal about, you're not experienced to be in this role. And I wasn't. But, actually the role was put forward to them first and they said no. So it kind of put us in a tricky spot. And I stepped in and was like, well, let's do something about it. I believed in the business. And my default, I didn't have a lot of role models for great managers or leaders in my career to date. And my default was to control. So I really did lean into command and control. I had a folder with highlighters and, ran every meeting like a military drill. And it, I can do it. It doesn't really suit my personality. But I think what was so interesting at this time was, even though everyone knew, myself included, I didn't have the answer. When we sat in the boardroom, everyone in my team looked to me for the answer. And I found that really interesting. And then the problem I wanted to solve was, how do I shift that dynamic? They're obviously used to having a leader that is that kind of, director, not dictator, but someone who is like, okay, let's go. Here's what we're going to do. There's a time and place for that. In that place and that time, that was not the style I could lean on. So I was like, how do I get them to realize that the answer is actually on the other side of this table? I need them to believe in that and to come to the table with ideas, with solutions and ownership. So I read a lot of books, and there was some good ones, some great ones. A lot I found were extremely aspirational and also were written with the assumption that I had 20 something years of corporate experience and training that went with it. And I came across a book by an author I'd actually met at a conference that I'd spoken at, George Bradt, who had written the New Leader's 100-Day Action Plan. And I loved his framework. And I called him up one day and said, I loved your book, super practical. But, there's 3 kind of use cases that I think need something else. Myself, selfishly, I need something that's like, okay, let's take it down a notch and go, I'm setting this up for the first time. How do I run an all hands for the first time? How do I do a board meeting for the first time? Like that kind of level. I have friends in corporate that I'd left corporate to join my parents' business. And a lot of my friends are being promoted into management roles with no training, and they're now managing their friends or peers.
Peers, yeah.
And that, they were really, really struggling, burning out. It was horrible. And then I had some founder friends who, as probably all know, have never managed anyone for the first time and were, raising money and building teams and just had no clue what they were doing. So I said to George, I'm like, I think here are 3 reasons why this book should exist. And he said, great. Do you want to write it with me? And That's how I became an author at 28.
About a book that you didn't have experience doing.
So if anyone wants to talk about imposter syndrome, my DMs are open. But I was like, well, I'm not going to say no. And actually, I do know a lot about doing things for the first time. And I know a lot about what it feels like to be in that role, to be in a position where the internal voice is saying, is your hater table. And that can sometimes influence in the wrong way your style, your leadership, but actually, how do I build that confidence while I'm actually not sure myself what I'm doing? So It was a great process. Have it here. We produce First Time Leader, foundational tools to inspire and enable your new team. And it was through that process, and also just the not so great family dynamics of working with family, that I realized my passion was really in helping leaders be better in a more modern, progressive, and 21st century way. And that's when I decided I was going to move into tech, because the corporate world were not interested in a young woman with a book.
When you're going through sort of those 3 use cases you mentioned, you still sometimes struggle between this IC and manager. And what's the difference here? What is the difference? And how do you, because in some ways that's got to be part of the imposter syndrome, right? Where you're like, I really know what I'm doing, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yes. And I see this in myself, and I see it a lot in the folks that I work with. For me, and I think for others, it feels good to do things. And I do think if we looked into it, it probably relates to the school system also, like submit a paper, get graded, get patted on the back. You did a good job. And I don't know anyone that loves group projects, but that wasn't my, ended up doing everything in the end anyways. So I think leadership is quite gray. That's how I translate it. When I work with clients and they're struggling to let go. And I have a saying, you've got to let go to grow. If you want to grow your business, if you want to grow yourself, you're going to have to let go of what you're doing, because there's bigger problems on the other side. But when you let go of doing things, there isn't necessarily a long list of or tasks that come in behind it. So being a great leader, and it's all about creating the conditions for great teamwork, high performance. That's about sitting above the board and being able to, look across the team, see what's happening, connect dots, do stakeholder management. If you're in the weeds and doing all the stuff all the time, and your calendar looks like a really well played Tetris game, there's no space for leadership there, because you're not able to see the wood from the trees, but you're not able to connect the dots, solve problems, and be there to help people grow and develop. And all of that stuff is, it's almost like venture capitalists. You get a return of that investment of time. Whereas doing the thing gives you immediate gratification in return, but long-term it doesn't.
This is like a scaling mechanism, right? You
Yeah.
have to invest in that. It takes a while to scale. You mentioned in that role of where you took over from the business, and there's all those people who are much more experienced, and they're
Yeah.
more experienced as ICs, and yet they're looking to you because that's the pattern that was established, right?
Yeah.
That must have been a situation. I mean, how did you feel? Like, was there a moment there where you sort of like had a realization of like, I can't give you the answer. You have to come up with this, but my role then becomes different. Like, was there a moment where you sort of realized that?
Yeah. I think there was this, like, so I came in, got my system together, my like highlighters and stickies. And two things happened, I think probably within the first 6 to 8 weeks. One of my team members gave me some feedback about my confidence. And we had a team meeting, and I was, every day I was clearly like stretching myself, nervous, like unsure. And anyways, we'd had a team meeting and everyone else had walked out, and she stayed behind and turned around and said, Jillian, if you just believe in yourself, you've got this. And I was
Wow.
like, what? She's like, your confidence. She's like, you know what to do. Just believe in yourself. And then she walked out. And
Wow.
yeah, like immediately broke down, because I thought what I was putting across was the energy of someone that got this. But actually, by not connecting to myself and being a style that I thought I needed to be versus the style that is more related to me, fits to me,
Yeah.
I was playing an imposter. So that happened. So I immediately went and got a coach to help, like, okay, how do we bridge this gap? Because I have a job to do. I'm doing it in a style that doesn't seem to align with who I am. What is this other style, and how do I shape it? And then the other thing that happened was that boardroom moment where, I stepped in and was like, oh my God, they're all looking at me. And I'm like, I don't have the answer, because I've been working around this business since I was 12, but you are all experts in your field. And it was just such an aha moment to notice the pattern that I was stepping into, and how I was not qualified to lead that pattern. So it was those two things.
You're not qualified to lead the pattern of command and control because you
Yes.
don't have that expertise, whereas they do
Experience.
have the
Yeah.
expertise. So therefore, you have to have a different style. Is that what you're?
Yes, exactly. So it was those two things happening probably within weeks of each other that it made me stop and reset, and then really think about, what is the leader that I need to be for this business right now? How do I work individually with each person, but also as a team to create new conditions of behavior? And then decide to write a book about the process.
So when you had that realization, you got to the coach and so on, was there something specific differently that you did, and how did that play out with the team? Because I imagine the team would have noticed a difference.
Yes, I think I was upfront with the team. That was like finding my voice, because there were also quite a lot of naysayers, like I said.
Yeah.
And I had to address them directly. I had left it, but then I could keep hearing about it in hallways, about how just people complaining. And like, this business was in a crisis. Like, the founder had left. I think it had been a few years. They were not able. It was also post-recession backlash.
Mm-hmm.
So the industry was slowed down. And I had to just step in and get everyone rallied. And I realized I also had to role model the things that no one else was doing because they were afraid. So I remember, okay, no one's doing business development. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and start doing some business development. And I got some leads in Calgary, and I flew to Calgary. I remember going to John Deere head office of Canada, pitching to a boardroom of execs, and like just doing it. And I won some projects. So
Yeah.
I think that gave me immediate cred. So to anyone listening there, if you can close some deals, that will get everyone off your back for a bit. Because there's a demonstrable value that you've brought in. But also to say, listen, I know that was scary. Like, it was uncomfortable. Here's what I did. And to be able to live it was great.
Yeah. And so to learn from there, like with that experience of like having, I guess in some ways, been trying to be someone you're not, then eating a bit of humble pie and then figuring out how to be much more effective by being less directive.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you're working with George Bradt on the book.
Yeah.
And that must have been a whole another game of imposter syndrome, as you've mentioned. But I mean, how do you go through that from being like, doing this once and sort of doing it a little bit, then asking for help and then writing the book? And what's the story with that? Like, how did that go?
Yeah, it was so fascinating because all of this change and transformation that I'm talking about was happening as I was writing the book. We wrote the book over the course of 4 months.
Right.
So it was a really intense process. It was also, as I realized, I think I'd now been working in the business for about 12 to 18 months proper. And the dynamics with my family, my parents were so like horrible,
Right.
that through writing this book, I also realized I didn't want to executive recruitment was not my passion. I was here really to try to save my dad's business. And I didn't want that to be the identity of my life or cost me my family dynamics
Yeah.
either. So yeah, it was an interesting process. But I think just to pick up something on you said earlier, like yes, I couldn't be directive, but one of the biggest learnings of that transition was learning how to find my directive voice.
Okay. What does that mean?
Because I wasn't the expert in the room, but my job was to make sure that this team rally and deliver, which meant I had to lean into some hard conversations with adults and know when was the line being pushed that I actually had to speak up and say something. Because being an empowering leader doesn't just mean let the team decide everything.
Yeah.
It's setting the constraints and letting them know where their role is to play, but then also having that like authority and awareness of stepping in and giving hard feedback to some very smart people.
Do you give us an example of like what you mean by that? In particularly, like one of those situations where your authority or your directiveness is unrelated to the subject matter in some sense. Like you're still respecting their expertise, but you're trying to drive for a result. I presume that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah, there was one like case. So I'd started. I picked up the like shit sandwich approach to feedback and was giving these like sandwiches away a lot until I realized that some people were only leaving listening to the bread when I really
Right.
needed them to listen to the
Hard feedback.
feedback, and others would not listen to the bread, just the hard feedback. And there was a case where there was a woman in the team, we'll call her Rita, who was quite a big personality, and people looked up to her, and she could like either the type of person that decides what energy is going to be in the room. Like if she was in a good mood, she'd lift everyone up, and if she wasn't, she'd lift everyone down. And we had a really tricky client, but it was it was a significantly paying client, but they were horrible to deal with.
Right.
And I was trying to motivate the team because, I had people coming into my office every day saying, do I have a job? Right. It was that kind of crisis. Yeah. And so I'm trying to rally the team, motivate the team, show that there's going to be life on the other side of this crisis. And every time we would talk about this client, she would roll her eyes. She would make some snarky comment about, oh, they're never going to do that. Or, oh my God, here they go again. And all that effort I would put in would be gone in an instant because she would just suck the energy out of the room. And I started to get really frustrated. I went and told her. And then it could keep happening. And then I noticed internally, I started to get quite upset with her. And one day I decided no sandwich. I was just going to pull her aside. So I did. I said, Rita, could you give me 2 seconds before you leave at the end of this meeting? And she had done it in the meeting because I knew she would. And this is something my coach helped me with. Like, she's likely going to do it in the meeting because she does it every Monday. So I pulled her aside and said, do you realize every time that we bring up the client, you say something snarky and everyone's mood drops? And I was expecting like a debate. That's what I think we all expect feedback to be. And she just went, no, I had no idea.
Yeah. Wow.
And I was like, well, it is. And what would be really helpful for me is if you could be my buddy on this and keep the team motivation up just so we get through this period. She's like, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for letting me know. So there was that kind of conversation. And then there was also conversations, which was, hey, so-and-so, I hear you're saying this about me behind my back. It'd be great if you stopped or get another job. Like there were varying degrees of being direct. But I had to, I was a shy kid. Like I'm an introvert. So doing these things prior to being, I think I hadn't even turned 30, really stretched my personality, but it was so valuable. It was a crash course in leadership.
Is that situation with Rita, where in some ways I love that story because it's kind of empowering. It's empowering you. You're empowering yourself as a leader. Your coach helped you with that, and you're helping her to empower. Helping you and her between the two of you are empowering the team, but also empowering her to understand what's actually happening and what's good look like. And it's really interesting because often people think of empowerment as being something that is about loss. You lose power here and gain power there, and there's a zero-sum game. But it's not the case. This is one of those situations where by doing that, you've increased the power of everybody. That's an amazing story.
Yeah, thank you. And it also taught me, I was doing a certification in coaching at this time. And I think, it taught me that as a leader, you don't always have to lead with answers.
Yeah.
Because I could have just gone into that conversation and said, hey, Rita, you do this all the time, stop. And I think I would have had a really different conversation, because as soon as I make an observation, it can be posed as, it can be received as critique. And Rita could have been defensive and gone, no, I don't do that. But asking the question checks also someone else's self-awareness.
Right. So have you noticed that when you do this happens? Because this is a factual observation of what's actually happening. And she's like, I didn't realize. And then I presume that in this situation, she's then realizing and noticing the observation.
Yeah. Excellent. And you could have someone, I've used that technique before. There was another technique a few years ago when I had a really keen intern that was a bit distracted. And anyways, used a lot of techniques to work with him. And it was also over the pandemic. So teaching someone how to works, it was a lot. But I caught him in a lie. And that's like, if you want to get on my, if you want to see my red zone, lie. And I was ready to go in, like, just call it. I'm going to, I wrote a script, like, here's why I'm letting you go, blah, 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 blah. And because it was a pandemic, my husband and I were working in the same place. And just before this call, I was going to the kitchen to get a glass of water. And my husband kind of stopped me. It was like, whoa, what's, I think he felt the energy. He's like, what's going on? I was like, oh, I'm about to tell. I caught him in a lie. Here's what's happened. That's it. No more. I've given so much to this, try to get this to work. And he's like, well, why don't you open with a question? Why don't you ask him how he thinks it's going? I was like, because I don't care. I just want to, I want my justice. And he was like, well, just take a beat and think about it. So fortunately, by the time I got the water and walked back to my desk, I was like, okay, he's right. I'll open with a question. So I did. I was like, hey, just want to check, how are things going? And he was like, well, actually, and he goes on to say how he's not, found other interests, and he ended up resigning on the call.
Okay, all right.
So I always as much as sometimes it's hard to lead with a question, especially when you're emotive, I get it, but actually it's a superpower, because that conversation could have gone many different ways. He could have said, well, I think it's going great. Yeah. Then my feedback shifts. He says, I don't think it's going well. And then that's a very different conversation as well. So would recommend.
Exactly. The whole starting out with listening, it really changes the dynamic, right? Yeah. Excellent. All right. So let's move on. You were talking about you this background here. You've sort of been in this recruiting business and marketing and so on, and then you sort of had this big career shift into tech space and so on. Partly driven by, I think you mentioned it was kind of driven by the book, and being in corporate world and in these traditional businesses, people weren't interested in a 30-year-old woman who'd written a book, I think is what you said. I'm not hope I'm quoting correctly, so I don't want to put words into your mouth. without the experience. Whereas you thought in tech, maybe I can do this without that. And what was that? What drove that? I mean, that's a brave move in the first place. But what drove that, and how did that go?
Well, it's funny because I used to play going to work when I was a kid. So I always wanted to work in a big office and big corporate. And then when I got on the other side, I was so disillusioned by how people spent their time and how like anti-progress a lot of the environments were in, at least the ones
Yeah,
I were in. Slow, lack of experimentation. And I think, my dad was an engineer slash marketer. I found that whenever I was in circles with the builders of tech, I felt very much at home. And like, I guess my assumption was that they'll care less about what age I am and what
yeah,
experience I am. And they'll just, meritocracy. Like they'll just, if you're good, you're good, you can stay. And if you're not, you're not. So I left corporate with a bit of a vengeance. I quit without a plan and just had my book and was like, okay, like what's going to happen? And so I remember like using LinkedIn like crazy, like reaching out to anyone I thought was interesting. I and like, you get one yes to 20 no's or 20 ghosting, but all you need is one. So like I someone connected me to someone and I ended up doing a talk about my book for a portfolio of startups.
yeah.
There was someone in the room, Gabby, who will now longtime friend, but significant mentor at that time, who came up to me at the end and said, "Your content's great. Your slides are shit. Do you do you want some feedback?" And I was like, "Yes, please." I don't know what I'm doing. Like I've just come
Mhm.
from corporate. I think these slides would look great in corporate, but get it. It's different here.
Mm,
Um, and was at a point in my life where, it could go, I was almost like starting my career over because all the recruiters were just giving me more recruitment jobs. And like, that's not at all what I want to do.
yeah,
And I ended up I tried setting up, the business with no clients, no network in London. But someone from Us Two, which was a digital product and design business, reached out because they're like, I think we need some of your training for our leaders. I was like, great. So we had a chat, and what Laura didn't know was I was desperate for a job and something more stable because the first time starting this business was a lot of me sitting in our studio apartment, just making the time go by. Anyways, came back to them and said, listen, I noticed there's a role open. I'd like to actually apply and then I can do the leadership stuff and more. And they said, great. I did have an interview that was really like unstructured. I don't think any CV was passed in this process. And I remember like their CTO during one of the stages of the interview would just kept coming in and watering plants and then leaving. And I wasn't sure if I was like, is this a test or is this just an accident? Like, I don't
does he
know.
really like plants?
Yeah. Are they watching me? Is this like some kind of, yeah, interview test? But anyway, started working at Us Two. This was and I had no sense of what a design product studio was like. They had also just launched Monument Valley, I think 2 months before I joined, and I had no idea what that meant. But it was a big deal. And they had
Monument Valley is the
mobile game that's now available on Netflix. And it's one of the most beautiful games on a phone or on any device that you decide to play on it. But it's
right. So
fantastic.
they're an agency who made games. Is that
Yes. So
the
they had
design? Yeah.
because when you're in an agency, you can't talk a lot about the work that you do. So Mills, one of the founders of Us Two, was like, well, let's always have a team that's kind of experimenting and doing interesting stuff that we can talk about. And
Oh
Monument
gosh.
Valley was a product of 8 years of experimentation.
Uh huh. Okay.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think it had 26 million downloads like in its first month, won Apple Design Award of that year amongst many, many other
Right.
awards. So it was cool to be part of to jump into that and help the games team figure out their next chapter, something I started to do. Dice FM was also being incubated at Us2, which is the ticketing platform. It was like 4 people at the time that I started at Us2. So it was great also playing a role in Dice and helping them figure out how they scale, and then also help this product agency think about how they scale across 4 different countries.
Yeah. So there was kind of a baptism of fire in some ways, just like going into, again, I don't know everything here, but I'm here and I'll figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a baptism of fire. Even when I tell people now that Us2 was my first agency, they're like, oh, wow, it's definitely the agency to learn from.
Yeah.
But I think that was great because there were no systems in place, or very few, that it was a fertile ground, or like, be careful what you wish for moment, because I had complained that corporate was too strict. And then I went into the complete opposite, and it was on me and teams to build, and we had complete freedom to build the things that we felt were missing in an environment that it really rethought how I think about org change, leadership. Like, it was an anti-MBA, but it was one of the most valuable things or moments in my career.
Yeah. So and then that was the introduction to tech, and then suddenly you're a tech person.
Yeah.
Did you have credibility in the space?
Immediately, yeah. Well, like, I remember, I think the tagline that people brought me into Us2 was like, this is Gillian, she wrote a book on leadership. So that was like, and then in Us2 it was like, this is Gillian, she worked at Us2. Then I went to WeTransfer, and it was like, oh, this is Gillian, she works at WeTransfer. And then you just start building these like creds. And the whole time I'm like, I am also a person. Like, I have interests and hobbies.
The banners and marquees are things that do open doors. I mean, let's face it. Your list of names on your LinkedIn is quite impressive, right? So it is a thing that does still come along with who you are.
It really does. And George actually said when we wrote the book, he was like, don't have any expectations that you're going to be retiring from this book, but see it as a really good business card, or credibility business card. And he wasn't wrong. And I think to anyone listening that is starting their career or wants to start a business, like, I immediately went for the brands, because it's so silly, but it is, we like to oversimplify things, and it just helps build credibility very quickly. No one asks you, well, what did you do? I mean, you should ask me, what did you? But no one really does. They just go, oh, well, if Us2 have validated her, then great, we don't have to. And that's, it's good.
So we're in this situation. We've gone through. You're at Us2. You've written the book, and you're sort of now in the tech world. Are you feeling confident now about your tech knowledge and your product thinking and all of that sort of stuff, or where's Gillian at this stage?
Yeah, I mean, like, my immediate thing was to read books like that. Like, I'm going to go learn enough, and that, I think, going back to the one like skill I picked up doing headhunting, was you had to know enough to interview, like a chief scientist officer. You had to know enough to be able to interview someone, or a mining engineer. So I think I got really good at knowing enough about a topic that I could ask the right questions, and which drives my husband crazy, because he's a deep learner, and I'm a skim one. So when I say, like, the shift from corporate to Us2, like, was so drastic, a lot of what I had to, or what I was tasked to do at Us2, was to build in some systems and processes that would enable them to scale, with some chaos, but not as much chaos as it was. And I realized very quickly that if I took the corporate way of leading change, which is go into a room with a couple of people, stakeholders, design an outcome, and then launch it, I was going to be spat out of Us2 very quickly.
Yeah. So
I was like, I need to understand my audience. And so I went and sat with different product teams and was like, tell me, I've read Lean Startup.
Yep.
I'm a big fan of Eric Ries. Is it Ries? I loved Lean Canvas. I still do. So I was already interested in it. And I had also been advising at some, startup accelerators. So I'd started to get the language, but then really being able to sit with product teams and team coaches and like, tell me how you work. How do you build software? When does design come in? What's UX? I still think I get it, but how does this all work? And then I used their language and processes when it came to implementing change. And that was one of these foundational shifts of my career that I will always attribute to us too, and that those few years that I was there.
Yeah, that whole idea of like asking people to educate you about a topic, I find that super valuable in terms of like just earning trust, because but somehow the intuition tells you, if I ask this dumb question, they'll think I don't know anything. But what actually happens is you demonstrate you're interested in the answer, and then they get to teach you, and then they know that you know what they told you.
Yes. Yes.
And then they trust you.
Yeah. And similar to the experience at my dad's company, I had to know where was enough leeway. Like, I was the expert on this system. So like, you're an expert, you build software, you're a designer. I'm keen to get your opinion, but there is no way I'm letting you shaping our salary framework.
Mm-hmm.
That's my expertise. So it's knowing like, where was the lines? Where were those constraints that I allowed people to play in and to give feedback and input? The questions that I was asking, even though I had an answer to, but I wanted to hear what they had to say to get their viewpoint, but also if we were aligned, then it was their answer and I could attribute that to them and they felt part of the process.
Oh, that's also counterintuitive in some ways, because often people want to claim credit for their ideas. Well, quite commonly. So this is in some ways, this is a, is this in some ways applying product thinking to, because we were talking about this earlier, product thinking to the change management process? Is that you've got the product thinking, but you're applying it to change management and how you change culture?
To this day, I say like minimum viable change, and we've got a whole process. So like, I think too many of us propose ideas that look too cooked than they are. So my opinion, I would, to this day, if I'm either with a client or my own team, start with a blank piece of paper or an empty mural and go, here's what I'm thinking, and share your logic instead of going, here's what I've thought and presenting a PowerPoint, because it can seem way more cooked than it is. And it's more safer to build together if I'm going to give feedback than building on something that doesn't look like doesn't look like it took a lot of time to put together, versus giving feedback to something like, looks like they've spent, I'm just going to hold back a bit.
So this is like to have this, we sometimes call this, at Amazon, we had this idea of the straw man document.
Yeah.
As in, you put together I remember this VP that I worked with, he would say, we need a document on this, like a discussion paper or what we call a press release, an FAQ.
Yeah.
And he'd say, put something together, anything with a structure, and then we'll tear it apart. It's put together for the sake of us tearing apart and engaging everyone in contributing, and then we'll develop the right answer. But what you've put together often doesn't survive.
And it should, and that's okay, right? And I think when I'm someone that, like, I don't know if this has helped me or hindered me in my career, but I remember even when working with my parents, and maybe it's my lack of experience forces, but I'm like, I don't care if I'm credited for this. I just want to fix the business.
Yeah.
And so the same thing was true for us too. Like, I don't care if it's my name, someone else's name. Like, if this means something more to someone else, I don't care. I just want to fix this business. I want to move it forward. And so when it came to, for example, the salary framework, I wanted people to feel a part of it, so that when I went to launch it, I had a room of ambassadors instead of people being surprised and shocked and then having lots of, complaining one-to-ones after the fact. But everyone could see themselves in it, but also educating them along the way, because I knew that my expertise was this thing. Doesn't mean it's fixed, but there are areas that we are not going to do transparent salaries. Like, I had a lot of people that it was around. Yeah. Buffer had come out with their transparent salary framework at this time. And a lot of people, including the founder, I think, was like, let's do transparent salaries. I'm like, nope. If you don't start with transparent, we could, like, if that's what we want to do, just like, here's what is going to come after that, because I've seen the salary data and I don't think we want to have those conversations. So let's do something that's clearer. So we had, moved to ranges. So you knew that everyone in this range was making about this much. But I think Buffer started day 1 or day 5 with transparent salaries. So it's from their culture. It's embedded in it. being a
Yeah.
company, I think at that point was maybe 10 years old, and then doing transparent salaries. I'm like, this is going to be a big distraction for the work. Yeah. And it was also the time of holacracy was really
Big
big.
thing.
So like, oh, let's all move to holacracy. They didn't have managers, so it was, yeah, a bit of a challenge. But holacracy is a whole system that we need to learn. There's an operating system, there's rules. So again, I was like, I want to unpack why you're interested and attracted to holacracy, what you think that's going to solve. But we as a business, it's an agency, do not have the time or flexibility to work in this holocratic system to the letter. So let's build our own system. And I think that's another pattern through my career. The one part, and you probably get this too, when you work for the brands, people then are like, oh, well, what do they do at Us Two? Or what do they do at Spotify? Come do that here. And I'm like, no, it works there because it was like pre-reads or 8-pagers work at Amazon because Jeff is going to read them. I had a founder who couldn't even read like a paragraph without losing interest, push for 8-pagers. And I'm like, you're not going to read them. So what do you want to solve? Then let's design the thing that you can role model every time and build it in-house.
Yeah, I think that's a learning that has to happen at the client or the people wanting to make the change, but also as a consultant, because there's a natural inclination to say, well, here's how we did it at Google. It's a very natural thing to want to do, especially when you know the solution and you know it works there at least. And I certainly found that there were situations where I would say something like that, and they'd say, well, we're not them, we can't do that. And it was really hard for me to figure out, is that because you really aren't them and you really can't do that, or because you think you can't do that, or because you really can't do that? Like,
Yeah.
what's the truth here? And the funny thing was that I had no better way of telling that than they did. So we just had to go with what is actually believed and run with that, and then figure out, well, okay, let's make something that will work here. And having that whole collaborative approach really helps with that, like the way you've suggested before.
Yeah. Like we always say, like, you know, we work with our clients to help them build, like, I believe the answer's in the room. It's not me. We're overtime leader is there to facilitate using expertise, using our tools, but there is no expectation that we're coming with the answer because we're going to build the answer. Because when we leave, we need you to own it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you've built it, then you'll own it. Yeah.
Well, that's a great way of talking about overtime leader, because I think we've kind of got through most of the background here in many ways, and then you've made another massive brave move of going out independent, right? Well, had these big names, and it's like you have VP of people at WeTransfer, and these senior roles. Surely it would have been obvious to just continue on and sort of like become a chief people officer at this company, or a VP of people at that bigger company, or something like that. What drove the change here? Was that a brave move that it looks like?
Yeah, it was. I think it wasn't. Like, I always wanted to build my own thing. And the first time was unsuccessful, and that's okay. Timing, as my husband says a lot, delayed is not denied. So, okay, fine. I think going back into the workplace and environments where I felt I could be more myself, and have a lot of impact was amazing. But I have this, like, I don't know, it sounds a bit corny, like personal mission where I want to scale the impact. I think that leadership, what I found when I worked at Us Two, and this is what really, it was like the next level of, okay, I need to start my own thing, was I would bring in providers, and, the materials were not matched for a scaling company. And it was a lot of theory, not a lot of practice.
Yeah.
And I love working with engineers because they think critically, and you have to put someone in front of them that when they've got, a cynical point of view or a challenge, that person can hold their own in the room because they are really living and breathing this material. And I did struggle to find that person. So when I was coming to, what's next for me, when I was at Us Two, I'm not an HR person. I think that was the other thing. I moved on from recruitment offers and then moved into, but I'm like I am a consultant. I'm an IC at heart. I like getting things started and moving on, which you can do in a workplace. But I found one of the challenges being employed at Us Two and doing the work that I did is I wasn't objective. even if I was, I'm not perceived as objective. So I
that's
was
a big
like,
one.
yeah. So I'm like, I want to have more impact. I want to scale the impact. I want to build a business. And yeah, said to my husband, like, under what conditions can I try this again? And he said, if you find a contract that matches your salary, I support you. And that was great. It was a high bar, but I love a challenge. And it also made negotiating kind of easy because it was like, well, it's this. And if it wasn't, then it's not. So kissed a lot of frogs. Yeah, exactly. Kissed a lot of frogs and then met WeTransfer. And that was like a match made in heaven. Such an exciting company to be a part of. And also at the stage of growth, they had just raised their first round of Series A after being profitable for 10 years, 9 years. Brought a founder back with his design firm, like did an acqui-hire, and hired an external CEO from Amazon. And then there was me in between. So it was fantastic. It was like a rebirth of WeTransfer. Where are we going next? How do we bring people along? How do we grow into new countries? Set up the studio in LA, all that kind of stuff. So it was fantastic. And yeah, I think from there, Overtime Leader was born. And it's called Overtime Leader because I don't believe change happens overnight. Leaders are not made in a day. So all of our programs, everything we do is built with behavior change in it that happens over time.
It's not overtime as in work more hours.
No, I mean, it's a double entendre because really we only do the leadership work, after hours. And we have a dinner series called After Hours, actually. So you can look at it how you want, but the origin of the name is change happens over time. And it's kind of an anti-push to one-day leadership offsites and manager trainings to think that.
That's nice.
It doesn't fix anything.
So you're now doing this independent thing. What do you actually do? Like, who's the customer, and what are you doing? And I'd love to actually just talk through a situation that you've worked on that you think is relevant here.
Yeah, I think in a nutshell, we help founders, leaders scale their businesses as fast as they need to grow their companies, right? Like, so there's a lot of our sweet spot was that messy middle that comes with post Series A raise. It's my favorite place to live.
Yeah.
It's not for everyone. But coming in and just bringing calm to chaos, there are patterns that happen when you go through that kind of shift, that scale, you're overhiring, processes are needed, that balance of like not going too far that it slows everything down, but being just right that we can be efficient, we can scale, and bring people along. I think there's a huge shift that comes with the leadership at that stage because we need to mature one more degree, like not be too far out, but not be a friend. And at scale, like how do you, as a leader, like how do you lead at scale? How do you decide when is it time to let go of founder mode for some things, but then lean into founder mode for other things? How do you hire the right executives? How do you manage people that are, way more experienced than you? Because I've seen a lot of founders like just throw the keys to the castle away to a senior leader, and that senior leader comes in and does it their way. And that's not right. So anyway, we just come in and we help set up the business for scale, looking at executive team alignment, founder development, leadership capabilities, manager capabilities, and making sure that the culture is driving the strategy, not the other way around.
Just clarify, what do you mean there? What do you mean by the culture is driving the strategy? Because this is one of those things where people always talk about culture eats strategy for breakfast and all this sort of stuff. And strategy is really important, I believe, at least.
Yeah.
But I mean, what do you mean?
What I mean is we have to look at like, where are you going? So this is what I did at WeTransfer. We bring the team together. Like, what does the next 10 years look like? If we're going to be, $1 billion business, like what does that look like? Bring that to life. And then we do a work back plan around, okay, well, in the next 2 to 3 years, that means we're achieving this. And then this year we're doing X, Y, and Z. That goes into OKRs. Great. But then let's think about the behaviors that we need to drive that strategy. So this was a big shift in a lot of the clients we worked at. We had clients that had never really thought about being commercial. And then over the past few years, okay, let's be commercial now. That just saying it doesn't mean you do it. So we need to do like an audit of like, what are the behaviors that we need? What does all-star look like? What does intolerable look like? And everything we do should be in the mission to drive the business forward. And that's going to feel uncomfortable. It means letting go of rituals and systems that were great for 0 to 60, but 60 to 600, we need to let go of that because it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. So just getting really intentional about the role modeling we do, but also making sure that the culture serves the strategy and they're aligned.
So it's like you're going to clarify the strategy and say, okay, we're moving from, for example, sales-led to product-led, or we're moving into a much more, where we want everyone to think systematically, think commercially, not just the salespeople, or whatever you're doing like that. That's the strategic direction, but then you have to change the culture in order to support that. And so when you say the culture drives, you say the culture drives the strategy, is that it?
Yeah. So how we behave, how we behave, what we're doing, what we're celebrating, our rituals should all signal to the direction of travel that we want to go.
Is this because the cultural things or the things you're doing are the things that cause the changes or cause the impacts, and that's what then makes the strategy successfully executed? Is that what you're meaning here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I guess all of this whole thing. Sorry, in some way, I love that topic because it's one of my pet topics as well. But all of these things that you're doing, it sounds almost like a microcosm of your own career. I presume that's something you're aware of.
I
you're
actually,
conscious of.
no, Richard,
No.
I realized it as we were talking in this podcast that I'm like, oh my God, I'm just, it's all connected.
It
thank
does
you.
feel like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It does feel like it's all connected. I think that's really interesting because you've been through that journey and you've been through that. How do I let go of things, and how do I, engage these people who are more senior than me, who are expecting something different, and how do I change the culture, and how do I make these big moves and deal with situations where I'm not familiar with it? And then you've got your clients with exactly the same problems, and you're able to lead them through that, to help them do that. I mean, I think it's your brave moves. It's the same kind of things your clients do, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's why it was, as we were talking now, and I was going back to 2010, 2012, when I was in the thick of it with my dad's company, and it was awful. Like no business, lot people like wanting to help, but everyone's kind of running around doing different things. Personal crisis at home. We even had a death in the team. Like it was a lot. And that was my 3rd or 4th year in my career.
Yeah.
So like fast forward to now, and I find it quite calm in chaos because it's kind of what I know. And then being able from that place of calm, and I get that feedback a lot from clients, like, oh, you really stoic, really calm. Because I'm like, it's all fixable. Trust me.
Yeah.
It's all fixable, but we just need to like bring it down a notch and think strategically, think intentionally, and focus on what does the business need for us to survive or get through this next phase.
Do you think there's a difference in terms of like the calmness and that sort of feeling of being in control? Is there a difference in being the consultant and the coach, the external, compared to being in the thick of it? And like, because when you're in the thick of it, obviously, partly you're in the middle of the storm yourself. And it's very hard to read the label from inside the jar, and people say that kind of thing. But it's also that you are emotionally invested and you do have an agenda. And so, is there a difference here? And how can people how do people think about that? Like, what do you advise your clients on thinking about that?
I think like we can get so yes, I think it's very easy for me. Well, I sit across like 10 crises at any given time, and like, if I was wrapped in it as much as they're wrapped in it, I would not be very good at a consultant. So there's also I have to learn how to not let my client stuff sit in me. And that's like, I've got to, do a cleansing almost of like, okay, not my circus, not my monkey. We move on to the next. And, what board coup is happening over here? Great. Okay. What, founder crisis is happening over there. So having to process that, but having been in the thick of it myself, like no good leadership comes from being overwhelmed and feeling out of control. And what I've witnessed on the sidelines, but I also run my own business, so I'm living it in a microcosm as well. Like it is so easy to get caught up, and it's so easy to talk about being our authentic selves, like letting too much out. And we have to remember that as, in not just a founder or C-level, in any role of leadership, you have a responsibility, I think, to kind of show up in a way that's going to get the best out of people. And that sometimes means putting ourselves and our needs aside or going to different circles to fulfill that need. And if we come in and we're like, make side jabs, like I had a chief product officer in an offsite, there were customer service for being a real pain in their butt because product wasn't keeping CS up to date on launches. So CS would find out about product releases on Twitter because people would complain. Okay?
Yeah.
And we were in an offsite and someone was saying, oh yeah, well, they're being, so CS took control. They're like, fine, we're not being heard. We are going to do this and we're going to make things really difficult for you so that we don't get surprises on Twitter. And so this chief product officer was very frustrated with all of this and out loud said, well, F CX, F them. He's like, we're going to go in. No. So I was like, I think it's time for break. I think it's like the product leadership team. Like, I think we're just going to call time. And I pulled him aside and was like, you can't say that. Like, you can say that to me. Right? You can say that in a close. I get it. I can feel it. But the reality is we can't. We have to work with them. But now what you've just done is sent your team in a direction of travel that's going to make it extremely hard for us to collaborate with CS because you've just put a wall up. And we need to create cross-functional alignment. So I get that your emotions are saying one thing, but as a leader, we have to know when is the time to toggle and say maybe the opposite of how we're feeling. And then behind the scenes, we are F-bombing and, fighting it out.
Yeah,
but to our team, we're saying the signals around the behaviors we need to the strategy. Like, we can't build this business if CS and product are not talking. So actually, like the right thing to say in that room was like, well, they're being difficult. What could we do? Let's have a workshop with them and we can figure this out. Behind the scenes. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
That's good. When you say team there, I'm interested. Does this mean, you can't say that in front of your team. Do you mean only the team that reports to you, or you're also referring to the team you're in? Because what's his name? Lencioni, I think, has this whole concept of the first team. Who can you reveal your true emotions to in that context?
I am so behind the Lencioni theory because I say your primary team is your lateral peers. And whenever I say that, everyone's like, whoa.
Yeah.
But yet no time, and for all those frameworks to work, for psychological safety to work, for feedback to work, for Johari window to work, you've got to invest time in your lateral peers so you get to know them so that when you are frustrated about, or you hear something that someone's done, you can go into we don't go into offices anymore, but you can go up to them and say, hey, I heard this happen. Let's argue it out. When you don't have that psychological safety, you just get people sitting on the edges, being nice to each other, creating what I think are quite toxic environments of niceties.
Toxic nice, yeah.
Toxic nice, horrible. I mean, you want to talk about burnout. I think it comes from toxic nice places. But actually that CPO should have just gone to the head of CX and been like, yo, I don't like what you did. Let's figure it out. And I've been called call someone in to manage conflict, like if it's that bad, but actually just have the GD conversation and work that out. But I think we spend so much time building rapport with our direct reports and then leaning on them too much. And things start to leak because how we feel starts to show up because it needs a place to go. Or I often recommend have a venting buddy.
Yeah, that's kind of going to be someone outside of your organization, right?
Or in like a peer, and just go to imagine in that, in that case, the CPO is really close with the head of sales and, create a ritual where I just need to vent. I don't need you to solve this and I want you to pretend you never heard it, but I just need to get this off my chest. Yeah. Because I think, I vent a lot to my husband or I vent a lot to my friends, but they don't have all the context and they don't know who so-and-so is. And it sometimes feels good to tell someone who's also in this play what's going on. because they know all the
Oh, I see.
characters.
Because you have the potential for it to be gossip and to be part of, affecting their agenda and your agenda, but at the same time, there's a value in that shared context, as long
Yeah.
as you can figure out how to how to
Yeah.
manage that.
Like in an ideal world, we wouldn't get to that point where you need a vent, but I think we have
Fine.
to acknowledge that we're human and there are days where you just need to take a walk with someone and
Yeah.
let it out.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fascinating. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I've learned lots of
Same.
stuff. I'd love to, as we wrap up, just talk about, why do people come to you in the first place? Like, I presume people aren't coming to you just because they say that they. Well, actually, I don't know. I'm not going to make an assumption here. I want to know, why do people come to you, and what do you actually do for them?
Yeah,
Um,
I think people, the whole business has been built off of word of mouth, so they all come hearing something, and I imagine the conversation is, oh, I've got this real problem with my leadership team, or I've got a real problem with my business, or I've got a real problem with my leadership, and I don't know how to fix it. And this other person says, "Have you heard of Overtime Leader? You should talk to Gillian," because like very often you have some folks who come like, we need leadership training with a
mm,
very clear ask, but very often it's like, this is what's going on, can you fix this? And we
so
usually can.
what's going on? Like, something, product and marketing are at each other's throats
Yep.
all the time, and we're struggling, and CS is upset, and
my
that's the kind of
yeah
thing.
my senior leadership team are making no decisions and they're acting like victims. My team are not high performing enough, and not driving pace. um, we've got a tricky head of sales that's creating
Yeah.
some negative, toxic stuff. And most recently, and I'm glad everyone is, reading the whatever books to get this. We're about to scale, and we need to build the foundations for our culture, and that is music to my ears because very often we're called in at the end
Yeah, to
when
fix.
it's broken, and then you've got to refactor and build from the
Mm,
back in. And like in coding, that's like going and find the
yeah,
original source, and people have built stuff on top and there's no system. So thinking about that early doesn't mean to over orchestrate it, but to just have it top of mind early and thinking about, we know we're about to scale. We have a workshop called Prepare for Scale. Like,
nice.
here's some things that are going to happen. It's not going to be easy. We're not the silver bullet for peace. But there are ways of navigating that so it doesn't slow you down. And yeah, so how we deliver, we do one-to-one coaching, we do executive team alignment, offsites, love an offsite, whether it's a team, a
Mm.
department, a company. We do diagnostics and or design, and this kind of culture building. And I feel like I'm forgetting one, but
It's okay. If someone wants to find out what the other one is, where's the website? Do you know?
www.overtimeleader.com.
Overtimeleader.com. We'll link
Yeah,
that in the description anyway.
thank you.
So that's the last thing. If you're talking to yourself 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and maybe actually, to be fair, your career has been so varied and so many changes, but you're an earlier version of yourself, or you're that kind of thing. Is there a piece of advice that you'd give yourself that you'd say that you think would be, or something you wish you knew or you'd like to have learned earlier?
Yes. I think stop the overthinking. And I suffered, I still do, a lot of imposter syndrome takes over, and, oh, I should post this, I should do that. And then like, oh no, but what if this one person reads it and doesn't like it?
Yeah.
And I've let that dominate despite what I've achieved. There's a whole lot of holding back that's happened behind the scenes. And so I'd love to go back to that 10-year ago version of myself and say, just do it. Like, no one is going to call you out for, like, remember that LinkedIn post you did 5 years ago? Like, they're not, everyone's too self-interested. So
Yeah.
just, you will regret more what you didn't do than regret what you did and maybe it didn't land.
I find that amazing. And so, as the story here has been so much about brave moves and big, bold moves, and having courage to do things that are outside your comfort zone and facing up to imposter syndrome. And yet it's still a challenge, and it's still a thing that is real. And in some ways, that's, I think, evidence of the fact that you are pushing yourself and making the brave moves, because that's why you feel these things,
Yeah. Yeah.
and really helpful for so many people. So many people I work with have that same set of challenges.
I think the more we talk about it, I ran a leadership program a few years ago, and someone at a big name media company said in the last session, like, oh, I suffer from imposter syndrome. And you could see everyone else just go, wow. And I thanked him for saying that. And someone else shared, like, you don't, we all think that we're the only ones with these inner dialogues.
Mm,
And there's a spectrum of how loud and how they show up. But I think imposter syndrome actually affects about 80% of us.
yeah.
So know that however people are presenting themselves, there's probably a little voice inside saying, you don't know what you're talking about.
I've heard someone say that imposter syndrome, if you don't have imposter syndrome, you're either not pushing yourself hard enough or you're a psychopath.
Yeah.
anyway, on that lovely note, thank you so much for the conversation. I really
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it. I feel like I've got to know you, and I hope that our listeners have as well. And if they want to reach out to you, it's overtimeleader.com,
Yeah.
overtimeleader.com, is that right?
Yeah.
And you can find Gillian Davis on LinkedIn. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gillian. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed this whole time.
Me too. Thank you.